Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Strategies for Safely, Effectively, and Legally Using AI for Your Business. I'm Ernesto Burton. I'm the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review. Today's presentation is sponsored by McLean Middleton, and we'll dive right into it. I won't read a long introduction. I'll just say that today our speaker is Cameron Schilling, Director and Chair of Cybersecurity and Privacy Practice Group at McLean Middleton. And our prep conversation as we were getting ready for today has already been robust, so I can only imagine where the real conversation is going to go. It's always great to talk to you, Cam. Welcome.
Thank you, Ernesto. Thank you, Business New Hampshire, for sponsoring this, and I'm looking forward to a really kind of active session here. So the participants know Ernesto has some questions. However, I hope that you post your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to be watching it. Ernesto's going to be watching it. This is a super hot topic with lots of questions, so take this opportunity. Also, you can, of course, send me an email or call me at any point in time if you have questions and want to follow up. That's why I'm here. All right, so the focus of this presentation is to tell you as business leaders how you are going to go about identifying AI for your business, testing it, prototyping it, and implementing it. This is an incredibly powerful technology. It has the power equal to things like the internet or email. And we have an opportunity at this point in time to implement this technology in a way that is measured, planned, and strategic. And it would be a mistake to think that it would be safe for businesses to just simply adopt it without putting in place the right mechanisms to ensure that it's appropriately used. In fact, I think that's kind of what we see now is some of the downsides of the internet, that when businesses initially implemented that or email, there were not the types of protections in place that say safeguard against cybersecurity risk or privacy risk. So we're going to talk about what the smart way is to implement AI to reduce legal and business operational risks.
So, Cam, just as we get started there, you mentioned security right off the bat, and AI is a specific new technology that's emerging or has emerged. How does that play into your larger specialty of security, in particular cybersecurity?
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of brought that up right off the start. So I've been doing cybersecurity for nearly 20 years now. And when I started, what was going on then was the first stage of breach and the first stage of businesses starting to become more cybersecurity mature. And everybody was playing catch up because all businesses had accumulated these vast amounts of data without any real thought to security. We had very complex IT infrastructures. The cloud didn't really even exist when I started, not in the way it does now. So, we just had this massive information. We were all playing catch up to try to keep pace with the cybersecurity thieves. And that is not a good way to design a system. It results in friction, business liability, and risk. And that was 20 years ago. 5 years ago or so, the privacy revolution came about with GDPR and then the role of these privacy laws across the United States. And again, we're playing catch up because as businesses, we all collected a lot of personal information and use it. None of us really paid much attention to notice and consent. Nobody had any privacy rights. So again, we're playing catch up. We don't have to play catch up on AI. And I think that's really important, a really important juxtaposition. This is an opportunity for businesses. Not only is there opportunity in use of AI, but there's an opportunity to not get behind the eight ball. And that's the message I'm talking to businesses about with respect to AI. Don't get behind the eight ball, get out ahead of the curve. It'll be a lot easier and a lot cheaper and a lot more efficient than what we had to deal with respect to cyber and privacy issues.
Well, so where would you say most businesses that you deal with are right now? Are they right where they should be? Are they presumably if they still have time to get out ahead of the curve, they aren't behind it, but where would you say they are?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So AI is different than cyber and privacy in this respect as well. Cyber, the maturity curve for cyber was 10 years or so, maybe 12. The maturity curve for privacy was 5 years. 2018 GDPR came about, and then it's rolled across the world and the United States in about 5 years. AI will be a 2-year maturity curve, if that. And that means businesses have a shorter amount of time to get up to speed before they're behind the curve. To answer your question, Ernesto, very few businesses are ahead of the curve right now. Those would be businesses that have established governance committees, have started to test and prototype. We're going to talk about these things. Very few, I would say, of the small, medium, and large business classes we're talking about, less than 5%, and most of them are the large business class. Almost all businesses are, if they're even thinking about it now, are in the right spot. But if a business doesn't start thinking about this until 2026, they're going to be behind the curve.
How, when you talk about a 2-year maturity curve, can you put that in some more context, given
Yeah.
the rate at which AI seems to be developing and the potential that AI has to continue to develop itself
Yeah.
exponentially?
Yeah. So when I talk about a 2-year maturity curve, I'm talking about legal and business operational. So we will have broad-based AI laws that apply to us in 2 years or less. The EU adopted one this past year. Colorado adopted one. California tried, didn't get it. It'll come this year. Within 2 years, we will all have broad-based AI laws that apply to us. So that's the legal part. The operational part is even more important. AI is being implemented into business processes, both the applications we use as well as generative AI. And businesses that pay attention to the competitive advantage are going to be doing this over the next year to 2 years. And if a business doesn't do it in the next year or 2 years, it is going to be finding itself at a competitive disadvantage that is very hard to catch up on. The initial year and 2 years, as everybody knows, the curves go like this on learning, and so, or maybe it's kind of like the other gradient, but your steepest learning curve is at the beginning, and so the first year, 18 months, and 2 years matter a lot.
Okay.
All right, so just to give a little bit of an outline here, we're going to talk about 4 things. First of all, we're going to go through how AI is being used and will be used in businesses. We're going to talk about the actual business process to integrate it. That's number 2. Number 3 is the legal principles and the operational principles that apply. And that is what I hope everybody takes away. There's one slide that talks about the 14 legal and operational principles. That is critically important. If there's another thing that is critically important, it's the business process to implement it. And then the last thing we'll talk about is there are particular uses of artificial intelligence that are prohibited and particular uses that are restricted. And when I say restricted, what I mean is that a business can use AI for those purposes, but it has to take extra precautions. All right. How is AI being used? So AI has a couple of really powerful functions. And when I talk about AI, there's kind of gradients of AI. There at one end of the spectrum, AI is some of the simplest, like when you're typing an email, it is reading what you're doing, and it is kind of predicting. And that's a version of kind of machine learning. I mean, the other end is generative AI. So these are usually large language or large data models that when you give it a prompt, it is going, like say, write me an article about AI for publication in the New Hampshire Business Review. It is going to be actually generative, or creating a video or audio file or graphics or the like. And then there's a lot of gradients in between, which we're going to talk about, where AI is implemented into applications and may or may not have generative functions or predictive functions, but there's lots of gradients. And So AI can be used in a lot of powerful ways, aggregating massive amounts of data, summarizing that data. You can imagine that's great for lawyers conducting e-discovery and due diligence, great for accountants. It can analyze content and give you outcomes or predict outcomes. Again, this is a great tool for people designing products, doing sales and marketing, this analysis and predictive function. And we'll talk a little about that. And then the last is it can generate novel content. So these functions of AI, its true power, can be brought to bear in a lot of different business functions and therefore a lot of different business technology.
So, Cam, I will
Yep.
say that you will not find an article in New Hampshire Business Review that is written by generative AI.
You
Every
think.
every bylined piece that we do is written and researched by human beings, although we are using generative AI for things like ideation and brainstorming.
Yep.
Certainly a useful research tool. But it does beg the question, generative AI is so ubiquitous now that how do businesses know whether or not their employees are using it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So businesses can't just open up AI for employee use. It presents lots of problems, which we'll talk about, including confidentiality and risk of bias outcomes and the like. So when we work with businesses to integrate AI, one of the first things we're gonna do is we're gonna turn off the ability of employees to navigate to generative AI sites, so to publicly available generative AI sites. And in return, we will license a particular type of AI, let employees know that is the AI we license, give them access, not all of them, but the employees that need or want to use it. So we actually technologically turn off their access, but give them a different access. That's not 100% foolproof, but it seems to do a very good job. On to take that one step further, Ernesto, you asked, how does a company know when its employees are using it? The other issue oftentimes is, how does a customer know when a vendor is using it, or should a vendor be telling its customer that it's using AI? And the answer is absolutely. Transparency is one of the legal principles that applies to AI. So, a lot of problems can be overcome through just notice, consent, disclosure, transparency principles. So
That makes a lot of sense.
let's go ahead, Ernesto.
No, I was going to say that makes a lot of sense, and I think that for some businesses there may be a conflict or a paradox even, between customers expecting them to be utilizing the most recent technology, but also customers perhaps thinking, well, if they're just doing it with generative AI, why can't I do it myself?
Yeah, then that's a good question. So generating an AI output is not as simple as you might think. So on the one hand, let's assume I want to design an automobile versus having an automobile company design it for me. You'd think that maybe, with the right AI application that was based on the right data sets, I could just say, design me, a four-wheel drive, two-door sports car, rear engine sports car, and, boom, I'm going to get a Ferrari Testarossa. Not so. If Ferrari's going to design that using an AI application, they're going to have input all kinds of data about their prior designs, prior models, aerodynamics, logistics, fuel consumption. I don't have that data. They're going to have input all of their safety testing data, all of the industry standards. So, designing that car is not simply a matter of having an AI engine. It's a matter of having the data to go into the AI engine. Then it's a matter of having the right engineers to look at the AI outcome and ask yourself, what's right, what's wrong, what's going to work, what's not going to work, what's going to be, appealing to customers, what's not going to be appealing to customers. So, so having an AI engine doesn't give you the answer. It just gives you a tool, a powerful tool to get to the answer. Again, it's a little bit like the internet. You know, all the information is out there, but there's still a ton of work and expertise and knowledge that goes into assimilating the information and making whatever solution you're gonna generate using the tool, making it effective and appropriate.
Makes sense.
All right. So, you know, most people are going to know the major generative AI engines because this is what you hear about in the news. You know, ChatGPT from OpenAI, Gemini from Google, Copilot, Microsoft. Some of you might have heard about some of the other generative AI engines used to generate audio or video. These are going to become household names and words. These are going to get integrated into educational programs taught at colleges, community colleges, high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. This is what the young adults of today, this is what their world will be based on. This and of course other ones. It's kind of unclear which of these are going to ultimately rise to the top. But equally important is that we need to realize that AI is coming to us in the applications we already use. You know, irrespective of whether or not we're going to use a generative AI tool, you know, if we're a Salesforce user or a HubSpot user, you know, or another CRM user, we are going to get AI within that function. And our competitors are going to be using it. And if we're not learning how to use that functionality, we are going to be at a competitive disadvantage. And just based on this list, it'd be hard to say a business function that isn't going to have AI integrated into the applications we use. You know, now when you call on a telephone, in all likelihood, you're going to interact with some AI component, or chatbots, you know, are obviously AI component. A lot of IT help desk, at least the entry level, is run by AI. You know, all of our financial accounting software is going to use AI to generate financial reports, to generate tax documents, at least in the first instance. Again, and we're going to talk about this, AI shouldn't ever, or should rarely ever be used without a human control. So no one's generating financial reports and then just sending them to the board or investors saying, "Well, these are our financial reports." ERPs are going to use AI in huge ways to, you know, help control inventory, help order products, help control cost, integration between finances and other functions of the business. HR, we already have AI operating in our HR applications. We're going to talk about this because HR is almost always a restricted use of AI. Anything that has an impact on individuals or an impact on safety is almost always going to be a restricted use. So AI is here.
Yeah, well, this is a huge list of applications, and I would add, you know, that ones that we see from web design and development tools have AI built in for SEO purposes, and graphics tools. You had Adobe on the last slide. Adobe Photoshop is obviously, you know, all of these companies have rushed to incorporate AI as part of their toolkit. And that the question I think that raises is, you mentioned on the prior slide that it's incumbent on businesses to know and control how employees are using AI. In some cases, do the businesses or even the employees themselves understand where AI is built into applications, and do they have to be equally as careful with these kind of things as they do with generative AI?
The answer to your first question is, do they know? The answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no. One of the purposes of the structure we're going to talk about and the governance team we're going to talk about is to identify them so that we do know. Some of these are risky as generative AI. You can imagine that using the AI function of AutoCAD or SolidWorks to generate, you know, a new design for an airplane wing, or, you know, a brake pad on the car. Yeah, could be dangerous. And others not so much. So, you know, the first thing we need to do is identify where they are. The second thing we need to do is identify what they're doing, and then we can figure out, okay, based on what they're doing, you know, is this risky? Is this not risky? What safeguards do we need to put in place, and so forth? There's a good question in the chat, in the question, and the question is, Will businesses need to disclose when we are speaking to or chatting with an AI robot? The answer is right now they don't. In the future, will regulation require it? Maybe, unclear. I think that there is a likelihood that in the US regulations will be adopted that require businesses to at least provide some notice of the AI they're using, maybe even, well, definitely in some cases consent. Whether or not that's going to apply to a chatbot, that's a different story. Whether or not that's going to be a notice that pops up when you use a chatbot, or you have to go to the privacy policy, that's probably more likely what it's going to be. You know, a company provides a privacy policy that talks about how they use AI. I will say this: transparency fixes a lot of problems. And that's the way that's the way a lot of these problems will be solved. Think about like students using AI in school. It's cheating only is cheating if the student doesn't disclose to the teacher that they're using AI, and and the teacher says you can't do it. So the same thing is true at the corporate level. Customers are a lot less likely to be unhappy that an AI application is used if they know that it's being used, and have the opportunity to object and the like. So transparency is a really critical component.
So we have another question in the chat, but
Yep.
before we do that, I just wanted to ask one more follow-up on the point that you just made, which is, you gave the example of the teachers and the students, and there are a lot of tools out there that purport to be able to tell if a piece of copy is generated. How accurate are they? How much do we trust those?
Well, right now the accuracy is not above 60%, and most schools that we work with, and we do work with a lot of private schools, particularly some public school districts, are not using the identifiers, or if they use them, they only use them to potentially to flag a potential. And then humans review them in detail to determine whether or not this was truly a cheating exercise or not. They are not incredibly reliable.
So then the question here in the chat is, are there any legislative items on the docket right now in New Hampshire related to AI?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I sit on the BIA's tech committee, and we kind of are a legislative arm for businesses, and we have not seen any. Well, there's no broad-based AI legislation in front of the House or that New Hampshire House or Senate right now. There are some bills that pertain to kind of cabined applications of AI, but nothing broad-based, which is a little surprising, actually. Last legislative session, we saw a lot of those kind of small bills, many of which failed. I think we're going to see more. We're young. This legislative session is quite young, and also, whereas the House bills tend to get introduced earlier, the Senate bills can get introduced later. So I think we are going to see particular legislation that addresses particular issues. I don't think we're going to see a broad-based bill in New Hampshire this year. I think it's likely to come next year. New Hampshire usually follows the lead and kind of comes in the second round of this stuff. So as soon as we see states like Connecticut, Rhode Island, Virginia, some of the more progressive kind of East Coast states adopting, that's probably when New Hampshire jumps in.
Do you see anything coming on the federal level?
Maybe, but not likely. There's a reason why we haven't gotten good federal privacy legislation or cybersecurity legislation, and that is there are powerful lobbies that don't want that legislation. Particularly data brokers don't want it because it tends to restrict what a data broker can do and the consents required of data brokers. So the powerful lobbyists tend to kill the federal bills. The reason why I say maybe is because there's more bipartisan support for AI regulation than there was for cyber regulation or privacy regulation. AI seems to be a sexier topic that people think imposes greater risks, even though it may or may not. But so that's a maybe, but more likely not. And I don't think the federal legislature is going to beat the states to this.
Okay.
All right, so let's talk about the business process. All right, so this is definitely a process that needs to be a determined process. This is not going to happen by accident. At the same time, this is a process that has to happen quickly. There's no doubt that we want to integrate AI. I've told you the maturity curve is 2 years. This is not a process that trots itself out over 4 years. This is a process that we, start now, make progress on in 6 months, figure out what is successful and what is not successful, change course in 6 months, and a year from now, we are meaningfully further along. And that's kind of usually the biggest criticism of this process is, well, this is going to take a long time and we need AI now. Well, it's going to take some time, but it shouldn't be a long time. And the fact that we are putting AI in place through a process doesn't mean we're not putting it in place. We're just doing it in a determined and strategic way. All right. So the first thing is forming some sort of AI governance team. I like calling it a team rather than a committee because, committee sounds so bureaucratic, but it is some sort of, task force type team that consists of people all across the business. Most people think that IT is going to be the center component of this, and IT definitely has a role, but the other people that need to be on this team are C-suite people. They need to understand, or business owners, the top level business leaders. They need to understand what this technology does, how it can benefit the business, how it will impact their customer and vendor relationships. They need to be involved in policy setting, and this team is going to be a policy setting type of team. We need to put people on the team that are progressive, that want to adopt this technology. They're going to be our idea people. They're going to be the ones that are up at 11 o'clock at night and midnight and 1 o'clock scoping out ideas, finding the technology that works for their business niche, bringing it to the company. We need those people, even though they might be sometimes hard to harness. But we need business managers. So whoever is in charge of the business unit, the engineering group, the design and development group, the quality testing group, the HR people, these are the people who are going to know how AI is going to potentially impact their area. They're going to be the ones to test it. They're going to be the ones to know the advantages and the pitfalls. We have to have the business people and then the finance people, because it's going to cost money. This is an iterative process. So we get curious about it. We make a commitment and an investment, and we see where it goes and what works and what doesn't. And then we go back around and we research and we're curious again and commit, and then we try something else. We see where it leads us. This is not a process that doesn't circle back around. This is not a process that's going to be done in 3 or 6 months. But it is a process where, we will come back around to the start. All right. So how do we do this? Sorry, go ahead.
Just before we go on, I realize this is going to be relative in some ways to the size of the company, but what are you seeing as a good practice for the size of this governance team?
That's a good question. So it totally depends on the size of the company. A small company may have just 2 people. An IT person and a business person, or the lead on it might be the marketing person and the IT person. At the same time, a company the size of McLean, we've got, 350 employees or so, there's going to be 4 or 5 people on it. There's going to be, the IT person, our records person, a lawyer like me, the cyber counsel for the firm. And then there's going to be people in our trust and estates group and corporate group. So it totally depends on the size of the business. What I will say is, even for large businesses, the team is not greater than 10 people. It becomes unwieldy. But it really can vary. The size is not so much as important as the people that you put on it. All right. So the first thing that this team is going to do is it's going to find if we're already using AI, we're going to find out. figure it out. And we're going to start looking for tools that we want to use. And that could be generative AI, like a ChatGPT, or an audio generative AI, or it could be, Salesforce and its AI functions, or AutoCAD and its AI functions. So it's the first task is to identify where we're using it and where we might want to use it, and then to buy it. This is one of the critically important pieces for businesses. We can't just be giving information to an AI developer and not have the information within our own environment. So confidential to us, controlled to us. If we are using an unlicensed version, a free version, or a non-closed system version of an AI tool, then the developer is going to use the data that we put into the tool to train the AI. What we want is closed system. Our data goes in, the AI tool learns on our data, and so its learning benefits us, but doesn't benefit the rest of the world that uses the AI tool. For the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, those types of AI tools that are integrated into business applications are going to be closed systems. Not entirely. You have to be careful, particularly with some HR tools. But for the most part, AI tools integrated into business applications are closed systems. The converse is true for generative AI. Unless you license a generative AI program, and in some cases make sure that you have a closed system, it's not. The developer is going to use your data. So Gemini, for instance, you might be licensing it because you have a Google Suite environment, but you still have to ensure that your use of Gemini is a closed system, because otherwise Google is going to use the data that gets fed into it to train its AI engine.
Perplexity functions the same way. If you're paying, you can go in and select to not have it share your data with the rest of the web. Do you trust that?
Oh, I trust it if the documentation, the product documentation says that that's what it does. These developers know that this matters. Early on, the developers created licensed closed models because they knew businesses wouldn't be able to use them if they didn't. So I do trust the documentation.
So you would, for something like that, with whether it's Gemini or Perplexity or others that allow you to make that selection, you would then trust that with more confidential data?
Yes. As long as you ensure you have a closed system, you can use it with confidential data. You can use it with sensitive personal information. If you have a closed system, then it's closed. That doesn't necessarily mean that every employee gets equal access. We still have access limitations for data, for AI use, and for data in AI, just like we would for any other data on our server or something like that. But yeah. Yep.
Ooh.
All right. So once you get a license, you're going to establish a testing environment, a sandbox. You need employees that are going to use it. So you're going to recruit them, train them. These are going to be your beta testers, your seed capital. And then once you do testing, just testing is usually non-production data, just made up data. Once you start to do that, then you're going to prototype. And what I want to highlight here is, from the first moment you start training your AI engine, you can't ever undo that. You are teaching this. It's like a human brain. What goes in stays in. And so it's critically important that your initial data has integrity. It's legitimate. It's valid. It doesn't have bias, because that's the foundation. You build on that block and you put in more data and generate another outcome. And the AI engine learns on the data and the outcome, and then you build another block. And so data integrity from moment one is critical. And then after testing, you're going to do prototyping, which typically is production data, but with a client that consents to it and consents to you using their data as a prototype and using the outcome as a prototype. And then once you prototype, you're going to start implementing this in production environments slowly. So that's kind of the business process. And you can imagine, again, this is iterative. This is iterative. You may go back and decide you don't like that AI tool. And so you're going to try a different one, and you're going to go through the licensing, testing, prototyping process again.
So thinking about this process as you're describing it, this is even though we're talking about a process designed to bring a business to a certain place relative to a technology, this isn't really a technology process. This is a business process and sort of a political process. What are the biggest
Yeah.
challenges to implementing this
Yeah.
effectively?
Yeah, the biggest challenges usually are not technological. You're not going to run into hurdles with IT. The biggest problems typically are cultural, and financial. The cultural problems come in both types. There are going to be employees that don't want to use this and refuse to use it, and there are going to be employees that want to use it and won't follow the rules. Um, and you got to deal with both. The employees that won't follow the rules, typically, you can overcome that problem by um, technologically prohibiting them from using. Just don't let them give them access, but then give them access to the one that you want them to be using. Use them as a progressive. Use them as a testing employee. Let them operate in the sandbox. For the employees that don't want to use it, it's a slower process. And it's a prove it, it's a show me process. They really need to see how data goes in, what outputs the AI generates, to see that it can be just as good. It can generate just as good of outcomes as a human can in less time, that it can be used in a creative capacity. So they're not going to be your progressives, but you want to start operating them on them initially. The other problem can be financial, and um, a business should not simply choose to allow employees to use an unlicensed version because they don't want to buy a license. That is the wrong way to adopt AI. And so we work a lot with clients on just realizing, talking about what the financial investment is, what they want their return on investment to be, how they're going to measure those metrics. I think once you start kind of talking about those variables, we can kind of clear the financial hurdle. So
So
that's good.
one last thought on this slide. Somebody is going to be thinking out there, okay, you said it's important to be right on the curve here or ahead of the curve or not get behind the eight ball. And yet all of this seems like a very time consuming thing, especially depending on what kind of company culture you're working in. Some cultures move more slowly than others. How do what do you tell people to do to make this happen fast? Is it about goal setting? Is it about setting really specific time limits on each one of these, or, clearly identifying the steps?
I think it's about starting. It's about starting, because the steps follow. And the time frame's going to be different. The time frame for an adoption of a say a generative AI product that can help you generate marketing materials, or advertising materials, that's going to be a fairly quick process. I can't imagine that it would take more than a couple of months to find the right AI product and to test it and prototype it and then get it into production. So that doesn't have to take a long time. Whereas there are other AI uses that you want to be more deliberate and perhaps slower, like if you want to use AutoCAD to help you design new product stuff, or your HR tool might come with a great way to um, analyze all of the applications and record and analyze the interviews and the writing samples and the resumes and the reference letters. That's going to be a little bit of a slower process because you're going to want to do more, more auditing and testing. So, but again, even those processes, you can get them into production in 6 months. So the important part here is start going through the steps, because you'll be there in months, not years. But if you don't start, you're never going to get there.
Good
So,
advice. Okay, we do have another question from the audience. The question is, I am aware of several generative
yep.
AI tools, and each may have features that others do not. For example, graphics, text analysis, etc. Are you aware of any bundles that would include all the features under one plan that can be licensed?
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why everybody hears about ChatGPT, because it has great functionality. ChatGPT is a general generative AI model. You can train it with all kinds of data, including videos and graphics. It isn't just a large language model. Gemini is the same way. Copilot is not quite as robusty as ChatGPT, but the big names are the ones that that are more general purpose. That said, if you're a graphics designer, you're probably not going to want to use OpenAI. There's a lot better tools that to use to do that. And the tools, the reason why they're better is because all of the generative AI are going to be able to be built on a data set. They're all going to ingest data and give you an AI outcome. But then the way one differentiates itself from another is, what can you do with that? So a graphics design AI application, after it ingests all the data and generates an output, is going to give you a lot of functionality to then tweak it, change it, modify it, perfect it, all that sort of stuff. Then you put that data back into your data set and use it again. If you're going general and you want to experiment, go with the big names. If you have particular functions that you want to use AI for, look to the particular functions. All right, so this is the critical slide, at least in my view. The last one was pretty important too, but these are the principles, the must-haves of AI. First of all, for businesses, we have to own it. We have to control the environment, because we need to ensure that we can put confidential information in there, and it won't get used by the developer. We need to make sure that there's security around this. So most AI applications are not going to be on premises. They're going to be in the cloud. And so we have to think about cloud security, access credentials, passwords, multi-factor authentication, encryption of data at rest. And if we don't own and control the license and the cloud environment, we can't ensure that there's appropriate security. We're just kind of relying on whatever the vendor gives us. Very, very early on, we are going to prepare a written AI policy. And it's going to talk about all the stuff that we're talking about here. It's going to lay out who the governance team is, who AI officers are, what the permitted uses of AI are, who can, perform certain permitted uses, what the restricted uses are, prohibited uses. So the policy is very much laying out the governance procedure and the procedure by which we are implementing AI. Also, equally early on, if we have any restricted uses, one of the requirements of privacy law is that we conduct data privacy impact assessments called DPIAs. A similar concept is emerging with respect to AI. For restricted AI uses, we need to perform an AI use assessment. Also, if we're processing sensitive information under privacy laws in AI, the privacy law requirement to do a DPIA comes over. And so conducting an AI assessment with respect to restricted uses is going to happen early on. The next three have to do with how we let employees use AI and who we let it. So we're not going to just open it up to everybody. And we're going to want to make sure that only employees that need access have access, and that they only have the access that they need. And again, this is not because we don't trust our other employees. It's more because anybody who has access is an entry point, and there's going to be a massive amount of data that gets stored in these AI engines, and we don't want a hacker to piggyback on an inactive employee's credentials. Also, to some extent, we don't want inexperienced employees going in and generating AI results and inputting data that doesn't have integrity and all that sort of stuff. There's going to be training around this. Most employees are not going to know what it means when we say we can only input data that has appropriate integrity. We have to have appropriate testing and prototyping and auditing. Most employees are not going to know what it means to have human control over AI. So there's going to be a training process and then a monitoring process. We need to make sure that employees are doing this the right way. All right, next set of controls. There's always going to be a human who reviews what data is input into AI and the outcome that AI generates. Human control is not going away. And I think that's the biggest fear people have, that companies are just going to start putting data into AI engines and the AI is going to spit out a result. and nobody's going to look at it. And I think that perception comes from chatbots, which is what most people see, where most people see AI uh, coming up now. And of course, chatbots don't have great human control, but the vast bulk of AI processes are going to be should be tightly under human control. Talked a lot about data integrity. What data you put in matters. Even after we've tested and prototyped, there still needs to be auditing. We still need to make sure that we are catching invalid results, illegitimate results, looking for bias. Particularly, this is important in HR processes and product design processes. There's privacy law compliance. I mentioned that earlier. Transparency. So this is probably the biggest way, I've said this before, the biggest way to avoid problems. Give notice to people, included in your privacy policy when you're using AI. Make sure you get consent under privacy laws if you're going to use AI to process sensitive data. That's required by privacy law. And be transparent with your customers when you are going to use AI and when you have used AI. So in a lot of contracts that we put together for clients, and this goes to vendor management too, because a client should be putting this into their contract with vendors. The contract says, hey, if I'm going to use AI, I'm going to tell you, or if you're going to use AI to make something for me, you're going to tell me. If that's true, you're going to have certain policies in place, certain protections in place. If you do, in fact, use AI, you're going to tell me what part of what you produced for me was generated using AI, and I have the opportunity to opt out. So these are the 14 most critical principles. I'm going to save 14 for when we talk about restricted use.
So, but just before we move on, we have a question from the audience I want to get to, but then a question broadly about these 14 principles. Some of these are related to existing regulation, and some, imply regulation that may be coming next. What do you what do you think about how the enforcement of these regulations is going to take place? And I want to give a specific example, because you and I talked about this as we were preparing for this session. One example would be using AI to transcribe meeting notes, and not all of the vendors who have built the tools to allow that process to happen have built in an opportunity for people to opt in and give their consent to be recorded and transcribed. And you had some thoughts on where the enforcement of that was going to happen, and it might not be in the local companies.
So I will say this. AI is almost certainly going to go the way of privacy and cybersecurity, which means that ultimately the regulators will be some state body, probably the state AG. But that's the true regulation like that is not going to come probably for several years. The first regulation we're going to see here is by customers and vendors that are imposing requirements on each other contractually, or companies that are adopting these principles and then asking their vendors, hey, can you comply with these? I need you to comply with these. So a good example is these AI note takers. These plugins to Zoom meetings and to video conferences don't come along with consent, even though AI note takers are recording conversations. And in many states, including New Hampshire, you have to get consent to record an audio conversation. So, as a business, McLean Middleton is saying to Zoom, I need a consent function. You don't have it built in. And so the regulation is going to come, at least at first, in progressive businesses saying to their vendors or customers, these principles need to be in place. How do you achieve that? How can we achieve that? There's a good question from the audience that we'll take here, and that is, if we hire someone to write for us and they use AI to create what they write, what are the legal rights around that, including the work for hire rights? And how does a business ensure that it's taking care of its rights in that regard? So I'm going to go back to what we just said. If you use any vendor, including particularly a vendor that's going to write something for you, it needs to be contractually spelled out if they are going to use AI. And if they do, they're going to have to tell you. And your work for hire agreement will still work for that. Sorry for the pun. You will still own the AI output of the person that you hire to write for you, even if they've used an AI application to do the writing. And to date, AI developers have not asserted any sort of rights over the output of their AI engines. So in other words, if the writer uses ChatGPT to develop a piece, a text for you, ChatGPT is not going to have a claim over that. And the early case law is that AI engines are not people. There's no copyright on something created by an AI engine, which can create a flip side problem if you are creating things using an AI engine, whether or not there's going to be copyright protection for them. So long and the short is have good work for hire agreements with your vendors, and make sure that contractually they're required to tell you if they use AI and when they do.
Is there any language within some of these generative AI engines user agreements that gets really specific about who owns the output?
Absolutely. And it totally is different if you license AI and have a closed system versus if you don't license AI. If you license AI and have a closed system, you own the data, you own the output. The developer won't assert a right over it. If you use a non-licensed or open system, the data you put in is the developer says they own it, and that they have some of these developers say they own the output. Some of them say they have the right to use the output. What they really want to do is use the output to train the AI engine. Again, they're not going to usually sell the output, but they want to use it.
Okay.
So
Licensed closed system. Yeah, if you're gonna use it to develop your next Hollywood blockbuster, maybe you want to license the software first.
I think if you're going to use it for any sort of company function, you want to license it. If you're going to use it to put any sort of client data in, you gotta license it. The circumstances for unlicensed for businesses are pretty minimal, and it's hard to think of a use case scenario where business is really going to use AI in any meaningful way where they just shouldn't license it. I think most businesses are going to go to the ownership and control model.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. Let's talk about some restricted uses and prohibited uses, because this is the stuff where you have to be careful. Oh, there's a typo. I don't think surveillance has two L's. It looks wrong to me. Or maybe the I and the E are reversed. Somebody can help me with that in the Q&A. All right. So these, again, it's not that businesses can't use AI for restricted purposes. It's that we have to be more careful when we do. And restricted uses generally are uses that impact individuals, including impact them by use of sensitive information about them, or that have safety concerns. And so, AI used for surveillance, which is almost always based on biometrics, is going to ingest some form of sensitive personal information. That said, there's a carve out for companies to use biometrics, usually in the HR sense, time clocks, timing, clocking in, clocking out, biometrics to enter a facility or enter a room in a facility or a portion. That's individualized. So you can use a fingerprint or a facial ID to identify a person. But if you're using it, AI in connection with your video cameras to identify people generally, that's going to be a restricted use. And mostly the issues there. So let's just take this a little bit apart. So if a company says to me, no, I really want to do that. Let's say I'm a school and I want to use video cameras to identify people that come on campus. I'm going to say, okay, we have to ask ourselves a couple of things. One is how are we gonna identify these individuals? Where are we gonna get the biometrics? Is that going to be reliable? Where are we going to store the outputs? So we're going to identify these people. How are we going to keep safe their videos and their identities? What are we going to use this for? Are we going to use it for internal security purposes? Is it going to be access limited, or are we going to somehow disclose this to a broader group of people. So if you're going to use something for restricted use, you got to go through the privacy and security concerns. If there are privacy security risks, you take certain steps to mitigate them, and then you wrap it all up in a DPIA report or an AI use report, and you've done your job. And we can talk more about DPIAs and AI use reports, but essentially, they're documents where you want to at the end of the document say, this is the information, these are the risks, this is the mitigation of the risk. Based on all of that and based on the mitigation, the likelihood of a security risk or a privacy risk is low. And that's what you want your report to look like. Automated decision making is another restricted use. So if we're going to use AI to identify what consumers we're going to do business with, or what employees we're going to hire, or how we're going to treat our consumers or our employees, based on what the AI tells us, that's automated decision making. That's a restricted use. It also happens to be governed by privacy law. We have to tell people, get their consent, and they have the right to opt out of it. Anything HR is a restricted use. Don't get me wrong, AI has incredible powers for HR, and I think it's great. I mean, AR can run a huge hiring process where they look at applications, at resumes, at letters of reference. Interviews are recorded and analyzed. And that is an incredibly powerful thing, but it also has the ability to be biased, rely on illegitimate data, including our history of hiring practices, which isn't necessarily unbiased. But it's incredibly powerful. It just needs a lot of safeguards around it. AI can be used in HR to determine, where people should be placed, who they work with well, which boss they work with well or not, which subordinates they work with well, how to evaluate performance. I've just imagined an HR system that could read all of an employee's emails and all of their memos and all of their work products and determine when they clock in or clock out or when they're on the system, and aggregate huge amounts of data and do performance evaluation like that. Again, it could generate bad results. It could generate amazingly good results. But the point is, we need to make sure that we put a lot more security and privacy controls around that. Same thing is true in education. Anything to do with children is going to be a restricted use. Anything to do with sensitive information is going to be a restricted use. We've talked about a lot of it: children, health, biometrics, that type of stuff. AI use for infrastructure is going to be a restricted use. So utilities and energy producers are going to use AI, but there are going to be security concerns. IT is going to use AI, but again, there's going to be security concerns. And manufacturing is another example. And this is not an exhaustive list. There can be others. Some of these are prescribed already by law. Others are us looking a bit into a crystal ball and saying what we think should be classified as a restricted use by businesses. But it's essentially safety, things that affect safety in individuals. In just the minute we have left, I want to just list a couple of prohibited uses. It is unlikely that most businesses are going to stumble into this. These are bad things. But I will say this list includes not just the legally prescribed things, but things that a business is going to choose to prescribe in its policy. Just makes sense. So bad things, manipulating people and how they make decisions and their behavior, that's legally prohibited. Categorizing people based on, their personal characteristics, their race, their gender, their social status, and then it's typically categorizing them and then using the data to make decisions about them. That's a form of discrimination. That's legally prescribed. There's certain health or medical applications that are legally prescribed, and mostly they involve trying to identify people's physical or mental health issues based on other data. Obviously, the health industry is going to use AI significantly in its functions, and electronic medical records are one of those applications that is getting AI integrated. So that's not what I mean here. I mean more trying to categorize people and discriminate against them with respect to their health care and their medical care and that type of stuff. All right, the next kind of list is the things that of course a business may want to prohibit: predatory marketing, so internet scraping, and then using AI to send emails, unsolicited emails, and that also is a violation of the U.S. CAN-SPAM Act as well as some other international laws. Cheating, which is really not just what you think of as cheating, but dishonesty or lack of transparency about the use of AI. And that's not just cheating in the educational context, but employees using AI to generate outcomes when that's not known to the company. Deepfakes is one of the places where we do see this AI legislation coming. And I'm pretty sure we'll get a law in New Hampshire this year that prohibits AI use for deepfakes. This really is any sort of intentional dissemination of false information, not just the typical, spoofing Joe Biden's voice on a robocall, although that is an example of a deepfake. We want to prohibit people from using AI to hack, gain unauthorized access, damage systems, disrupt systems. As businesses, we want to say, look, you can't use AI to do unsavory things, illegal, unlawful, defamatory, obscene. It's all the typical things that you prohibit in an employment handbook because they're bad and we don't want our employees using it. So we say they can't use AI to use it. And then we usually have some sort of catch-all that says, look, AI can be really powerful. You can't use it in a way that harms people, a group of people, or harms our business. Of course, we want to, if we want to give employees the power to use AI, we've got to also tell them that they can't use it to hurt us. This is kind of the list of prohibited stuff. All right. We're a little over, but if anybody has any remaining questions, we'll take them now. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to Ernesto.
This was fantastic. I don't see others coming through. I'm don't know whether to resist asking the last question I have. I think I'm going to ask it anyway because we have you here, and I bet you can answer it quickly. On the top of that list that you had there was manipulate. Yep. You defined as attempts to influence behavior or decision making. This feels like the fundamental goal of like so many
Why else would you use it?
So, when I think about like social media feeds, for example, their goal is to keep you looking at the social media feed. So if they're using AIs for their algorithms to improve those, to keep you on the site longer, looking at one more TikTok video or whatever, is that the kind of manipulation? And similarly with marketing.
Yeah, no. This is a legal prescription, and perhaps the slide is a little truncated. But what the laws really prohibit is trying to manipulate a person to make a decision in a way that is harmful to them. Now, you could say staying on TikTok for 3 hours is harmful. Maybe. I think it remains to be seen a little bit how this legal prescription is applied. I think in the most instances, businesses are not going to have too much trouble staying away from this. But TikTok, oh, maybe. We'll see.
All right. Well, this has been fascinating, and I'm sure that the hour went by as quickly for our audience as it did for me. I hope that we can get you back here to do this again in a year and find out how this is all developed, because it still feels like it's happening very fast, and appreciate all of it.
And also I'll mention, I think the materials are going to be posted. So anybody who needs my contact information, the materials will be posted if you have questions. And absolutely, let's do it again.
Great. Well, thank you, Cam. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you to McLean Middleton for sponsoring today's webinar. I'm Ernesto Burden, the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review, and we will see you again soon.
Bye.